Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with one of the lists you've all been waiting for. The great Symphonies number 7. 7th symphonies that we've all been dying to see or hear about, right? I mean, I know after number 6, you were wondering, well, when is 7 coming? Well, here it is. And I've actually got a whole bunch of these already done, so don't worry. They are going to come chugging forth sooner than you think. So, how do we start number 7? Well, 7's interesting because lucky 7 is the number at which some of our favorite composers bow out, and you know who they are, but we'll get to them momentarily. Some of them are actually just starting. One of them anyway. And the 7th seems to also be a symphony that falls under a lucky star because these are great, fabulous, terrific pieces, all of which you should hear, and you'll love them all, whether you know them already or not. And we're starting at the beginning, of course, with Haydn, Symphony number 7, which is Le Midi, noon, or afternoon, because Haydn, wrote that trilogy, 6, 7, and 8, morning, noon, and night, which he did at the behest of his new patron, Paul Esterhazy, who he just started working for. And Paul Esterhazy was a big fan of Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, and he said to Haydn, I want one of those from you. And so Haydn said, okay, I can do that, but he didn't do seasons. He did times of the day, which worked just as well, and he showed off the glamour and extraordinary ability of Paul Esterhazy's shiny new orchestra. What a fabulous calling card these pieces are. So noon has to be the Symphony number 7, number 1, the first 7th that we're talking about. Next, it's Beethoven. It's got to be Beethoven. Just has to be Beethoven. Beethoven 7th is, well, what can we say? It's the soundtrack to It's the Easter Beagle, Charlie Brown. So, that sets the seal on its pedigree. I think it really does, especially the Allegretto, the movement that was so famous that people used to stuff it into the 8th as well as the 7th, just so they had a reason to hear it again. I mean, you'd think they would just play it separately if they liked it that much, right? Instead of mangling another symphony, but those were the days. That's the stuff they did. So Beethoven 7th, I don't even need to talk about it, right? You can go watch the video on Beethoven 7th. Next, let's see, what's this one? Oh, yeah, we mentioned this. Well, Sibelius, see ya. That was his last. He didn't even call it a symphony initially. He called it a Fantasia Symphonica. And he wasn't really sure what to make of it because it was only in one movement. But as it turned out, it was enormously influential because it sort of inspired a bazillion other symphonies in one movement as well. Now, it's interesting. This was not the first symphony in one movement, of course. There was the Schreker Chamber Symphony, the Schoenberg Chamber Symphony. There were these other pieces that were doing that sort of thing. You could even make the argument going way, 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 way back that Schumann's 4th is in one movement because you play them all together. And Nielsen's 4th is also technically in one movement because you play them all together. And all of those predated Sibelius' 7th, at least I think they did. But the point is that this was the one that really influenced a lot of composers, particularly in the UK and the United States. And the reason I think was, and of course Finland, and the reason I think was because of just the organic unity, the oneness of it all, that really, really is quite striking. This is not a symphony that has the usual 4 movements that are just attached. This is a genuine one-movement organism. And other composers have attempted to do one-movement organisms with varying degrees of success. I mean, what some regard as one of the greatest American symphonies, the Roy Harris Third, is audibly influenced by the Sibelius 7th in the sense that it is also a one-movement organism. Very, very cool. So Sibelius' 7th is a major, major, major 7th, and a wonderful way for him to go out. It really was. I mean, the 8th was, the one that everybody thought that he was writing or he was going to write, but he didn't write, but he destroyed, but they thought he wrote it, but they weren't sure, anyway. He went out on a high note. And that's what matters, isn't it, at the end of the day? Next, of course, they're sticking around in Scandinavia. Alan Pedersen, Symphony No. 7. Possibly a little bit less depressing than Symphony No. 8, which I assume we're going to be talking about, the list of number 8s, but I don't want to give away all the fun stuff. Pedersen, as you know, wrote big, long, generally single-movement symphonies full of gloom and doom and angst and misery, and I love them. They're so much fun. I had a friend visiting me one day, and he said, put on something that's like, nothing but 40 minutes of expressionist angst. And I said, I've got just the thing. And I put this on, and he was like, wow, that's great. Because, Pedersen's music it's not hard to listen to moment by moment. At least these middle symphonies they're quite tonal. Some of the earlier and later ones are much less so, but these are quite tonal, very, very beautiful, very haunting and elegiac, and they have these little motives that keep coming back, that he repeats 100 million times, that are terrifying. I'm not sure what makes them so scary. I think what makes them scary is their immutability, the fact that they never change. I mean, they really don't. And so whenever they come back after some huge crisis, there's this sort of emotional numbness about them that's really wonderfully frightening. And I mean that in the best sense. I mean, it hits you in the gut. And so they're not easy pieces, and they're emotionally draining. Remember our drainage series? Pedersen was in the drainage, believe me, because his symphonies express much drainage. But it's really impressive and powerful stuff. So Pedersen No. 7 is wonderful. Oh, and after Pedersen, juicy, Mahler. Of course. I'll bet you thought I was going to wait till the end for Mahler. It's going to be the greatest seventh and all that. No, I'm not putting it there. It is unquestionably one of the greatest sevenths. It's the least popular of all the Mahler symphonies, the least well understood, in my view, because it is one of the funniest, first of all. And it takes a while to get to the funny part, which is, the last movement. Well, really the fourth movement, the second Nachtmusik with guitar and mandolin plucking away. It's a very stylized work, an incredibly intellectual, sophisticated work. It really is. And, I like that. I like things. I like music that, some people are, just go for the emotion. I love the emotion too. I love going for the emotion. Don't get me wrong. Emotion's a good thing. But, there's also music that has a great deal of intellectual stimulation and sophistication behind it. And Mahler's Seventh is one of those. It's his most modern sounding symphony in many ways. It's harmonically very astringent, very, very interesting, fascinating work. It really is. And for those of you who generally find Mahler to be a bit much because of the emotional extremes, try the Seventh. I mean, it has the same emotional extremes, but it also has fabulous formal connections and things to think about besides the emotional extremes. I mean, for example, just to give you a quick example, the whole symphony is in a perfect Bartók-like arch form that is 5 movements, which are thematically related in the outer ends, with a scherzo in the middle and slowish movements on either side. That's exactly the kind of thing that Bartók was going to do in his string quartets, for example, the Fourth Quartet, and in his other works, the Concerto for Orchestra. And Mahler's Seventh really is a concerto for orchestra in that sense. It's a brilliantly virtuosic piece for the ensemble, harder than hell to play, and just tons and tons of fun. So, Mahler 7. That's number 5. Number 6, Malcolm Arnold. Malcolm Arnold's symphonies have been popping up with some frequency in these discussions, because I really think he was a major symphonist and a major composer. After the seventh and the eighth were the symphonies that were sort of the beginning of his death spiral. He was a manic depressive. He had serious emotional issues, and the Ninth Symphony is extraordinarily desolate. He was sort of like, at that point, the English Alfred Schnittke. Just very sparse, depressing kind of, who knows what. You might get into it at some point in your life, but I wouldn't put it on my list. Let's put it that way. But the seventh is turbulent. It's very turbulent and full of anxiety, but it's also typical Malcolm Arnold. I mean, it has really good tunes. It's really rhythmically exciting. It has brilliant brass writing. It's a good piece, a very good piece, but not easy listening. Not easy listening. And it's very funny, I think, that Malcolm Arnold gets crapped on because everyone says, his music sounds too commercial, and it's like pop influenced, and it's light music. But nobody tries to come to grips with the fact that as a symphonist, he's not easy. He's very, very emotionally and intellectually challenging quite often. And the seventh is one of those pieces. I think it's terrific. Next, Bruckner. You remember him. Bruckner seventh. Oh, it's pretty. It's so pretty. It's so beautiful. It has the most gorgeous slow movement in the world. Oh, my goodness. What an adagio. It's got Wagner tubas in it, and sometimes a cymbal and triangle and timpani roll at the climax, sometimes not, depending on how you feel Bruckner's supposedly not valid note is at that point in the score. But it's a masterpiece, and it's the piece that established Bruckner's reputation when Nickisch first conducted it, and it's impossible not to love. It is actually, in a way, a strange and lopsided piece formally. You have two big, long, slowish movements, followed by two short, quickish ones. And the way to think about it, this is just my opinion, is to put the scherzo and finale together as a clump in your mind. And then you've got first movement, big central adagio, and quickies, the two quickies on the other side. The finale might be a little problematic because it does have actually a sense of humor, but it's a Brucknerian sense of humor. It has like dancing elephants. It's very heavy. It's a heavy-handed humor, but it's quick and it's short. So, it gives lie to the idea that Bruckner just wrote these endlessly long, extended, formally dysfunctional things. It's not. It's quite concise, and it's not a bit transcendental, actually. It's really not. It's really frisky and interesting. So after Bruckner, well, we have to do Shostakovich, don't we? The Leningrad Symphony. Boy, has this thing been recorded a lot. I'm amazed. I was looking the other day. There's like 1 million recordings of the Leningrad Symphony. I mean, how many do we need? I've done a talk on the Leningrad Symphony. You can go see it. Or watch it if you'd like. The best ones are the Bernstein Deutsche Grammophon one and the Nimi Järvi on Chandos. There are a couple others in Shostakovich cycles that are very good. Mark Wigglesworth and the one on Naxos with Petrenko, and they're very, very good. But it's such a problematic symphony because of that big, long, crazy first movement, and then the adagio that sort of repeats itself way too much toward the end. It's not his best work. But it's a great symphony nonetheless because of its ambition and its I don't know what to say. It gets the job done. Let's put it that way. It really does, but it's a slog sometimes. It really is. I freely admit it. I mean, you have to be in the mood for it. But if you are, it's just tremendous. And after that, let's see, who do we have now? Oh, yeah. Carl Amadeus Hartmann. Now, he has not appeared previously in these lists, and there really wasn't a very good reason for it, other than there were other people who I thought, should have priority. But Hartmann was really the great German post-war symphonist. And the first 6 symphonies were all based on pre-existing pre-war music that he basically disowned or revised or did something to. And the 7th and the 8th, which were his last 2, are the 2 completely freshly written ones. So I thought the 7th at least belongs on one of these lists. His style is sort of atonal, sort of kind of, but not systematically so. It was just the way he wrote. I mean, most of his pieces are neoclassical in shape. They have Baroque sort of, formal structures, toccata, fugue, passacaglia, things like that. And they're brilliantly written and enormously exciting. His major influence in many respects was Stravinsky. Stravinsky for his rhythmic impetus, for that feeling of inevitable forward movement, based on very, very vigorous treatment of rhythm. So even though the music is not easy and you're not going to go away humming it, it will excite you. It really will. And in his slow movements, in the slow music, he can be extremely expressive. He really is. And I think he's a marvelous composer. I really do. The 8 symphonies are really quite an important and beautiful symphonic cycle. In the grand German tradition, which really essentially died with him. I mean, it actually had died before him, but then he popped up and did his thing. So Hartmann is an important composer, a wonderful composer. Next, something that couldn't be more different, Vaughan Williams, the Sinfonia Antarctica, which started as movie music to Scott of the Antarctic, whether the Arctic, and the ant one has a C or a T or not a C in it. It could be either. But Vaughan Williams called it Antarctica, which is fine. If you want to call it Antarctica, you can do that. That's fine. That's a fun symphony. It's a big, colorful piece of movie music. Who are we kidding? That's what it is. It's got penguins. It's got glaciers. It's got dangerous moments and a very tragic ending because you've got the offstage women moaning and the offstage soprano going, woo, woo, with the wind machine going. It's really fun. You ever seen a wind machine, by the way? A wind machine, in case you've never seen one, is this gigantic, it looks like a big spool of thread. It's a giant wooden spool with a crank at one end. I mean, it's big. It's like 5 feet tall and 4 feet tall, and it's huge. And you stretch a piece of parachute material over it. And you tie it down at both ends, and then you turn the crank, and it goes whoosh, whoosh. It makes a very successful windy type sound. Amazing, it really is. And there's a lot of that in the Sinfonia Antarctica. So that's something to listen for. You can't miss it. But going back a century or so, let's talk about the last symphony by Kalavoda. Now, I've been pushing Kalavoda now for quite a couple of years. I pushed his 5th symphony, which is marvelous. That's in this list of great 5th symphonies, because 5 and 7 are coupled together on the same wonderful CPO disc. And I want you to get that CPO disc with Kalavoda Symphonies 5 and 7 and the overture in A minor. It's great music. And the 7th is just as good as the 5th. It's incredible fun. It has a definite Czech sort of Slavic tang to it. I mean, it was composed in like the 1840s, and it's contemporary roughly with like Schumann stuff, and I think better. And Schumann probably did too, because he borrowed, music, the scherzo of Kalavoda's 1st symphony in his own 4th. So there you go. But there's a composer who's really due for revival. He wrote a pile of instrumental pieces, chamber pieces, mostly in smaller forms, but the symphonies are good pieces. They really, really deserve like a complete edition from somebody who's really ready to let it rip. But the 7th is a beautiful piece, and it was his last as well. So you might as well grab it, because there was no 8th. It's just the 7th. And after that 7th, we're moving back forward again. I'm jumping all over the place here, I know. Holmboe. Holmboe's symphonies from here on in are just really terrific for the most part. They really are. He was a great symphonist, the great Danish symphonist after Nielsen. I know some of you will say, no, it's Langyard. Well, it's not. He had his moments too. Don't get me wrong. He wrote some great stuff. But this one, the 7th, is really a fascinating piece. It's sort of it's like a single movement with interludes in the middle, and it has a very unique structure, which makes it very, very interesting to follow, and repeated listening gives it a lot of, it'll make you appreciate it all the more. A beautiful piece by a very, very serious composer. He's never too long. He's always shapely and beautifully structured, and his ideas are often quite arresting, even when they're only quasi-tonal. I mean, he later became more dissonant as he got sort of older, but he was never an atonalist per se. And not that that's a bad thing. If you write great atonal music, good for you. there is quite a bit of it. But Holmboe hovers sometimes between the two schools, and he does it very, very successfully. And after Holmboe, George Lloyd. George Lloyd is another composer who I insist on promoting because he wrote 12 symphonies. 12 symphonies, and they're very, very fine works. Even the early ones are very good. They're fun to listen to, at least the earlier ones are. And then from about the fourth symphony on, he was going like gangbusters. He really was. And the seventh is a big three-movement thing. It's about the myth of Demeter, apparently, or something about, the fecundity of the Earth Mother, and well, it doesn't matter. The problem with the seventh is that it has a quiet ending, which is, of course, the kiss of death most of the time. I remember, though, it was performed by the Chicago Symphony, I think under Nimi Järvi. Believe it or not, they actually did it, and it was quite well received. It really is. It's not as tuneful a work, and obviously tuneful a work, let's put it that way, as like number 5 or number 4, which are the two most popular ones. But it's recognizably the same composer, and you really, really ought to give it a chance if you haven't heard it yet. It's a fascinating and beautiful and unique piece of symphonic writing by a major symphonist who's never going to get the credit he deserves because his music's too good. That's the reason. And after Lloyd, let's do one by Villa-Lobos. Why not? We should. Villa-Lobos. Oh, he's wonderful, isn't he? Some of you mentioned his first couple when I was starting this series with the first symphonies and second symphonies, and really you could sort of dip in almost anywhere with the Villa-Lobos symphonies, can't you? And they're enormous fun. And they all sound like, the thing with Villa-Lobos is it's like he wrote one giant piece of music and he just cut off chunks and labeled them. So, he took a few chunks from the block, the giant Parmesan, the big wheel of cheese. He cut some off and said, Symphony number 7. And, there's no point in trying to distinguish hugely between 5, 6, 7, 8, 9-ish. They're all of a kind. And if you like the kind, you're going to like them all. It's really very straightforward. So give one of them a shot, and if you like them, you can try the others, and you'll be guaranteed of a good time. So it's a lovely work, it really is. And these symphonies, again, are also terribly underrated. They don't get performed. They're not easy to play, but they're also not too long, not too difficult in terms of approachability. They are not conventionally melodic in normal ways, because Villa-Lobos was, he wasn't conventional. What can I tell you? But it's wonderful. It's recognizably Brazilian, and it has wonderful, lush, exotic textures sometimes, and interesting scoring. Very difficult string writing, and prominent parts for the trombones, and strange percussive outbursts when you don't expect them. Oh, it's wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And after Villa-Lobos, let's see who else we got. Rautavaara. His seventh was subtitled The Angel of Light. It's part of the Angel series. He did a whole series of pieces that were Angel of Darkness, and Angel of this, and Angel of that, and, Angel of Junk Food, and, Angel of Volkswagens, and Angel of Petunias, and, But this was the Angel of Light. And he was, well along in his career when he wrote it, and it was the piece that put him on the map. And he's a wonderful composer. And it's a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful symphony. It is luminous, appropriately luminous. It has a slow movement marked like a dream. Come un sogno. It's like a dream. Oh, it's gorgeous. Absolutely a lovely, haunting work. And it deserved all of the credit it got. And it really, I think, gave him a wonderful amount of attention, in his life, which is always a good thing for a composer who's really a good composer, who needs, he gets the recognition, so then he gets commissions, and then he gets to write more. And I think there's a lot of his career, the way his career went subsequently, had to do with the success of this one work. And after that, he churned out a whole ream of masterpieces, beautiful, beautiful pieces. There was only one other symphony, but there was a pile of concertos and a pile of orchestral works of various kinds, and they're absolutely terrific. Absolutely terrific. So Rautavaara is my 15th. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Yes. Number 16. The 7th that I really think deserves, so much more credit than it ever gets, of course. Dvorak. Remember him, fellas? Dvorak. Dvorak's 7th is widely regarded as his greatest symphony. I don't think we need to make that claim. I might think it's the 8th or maybe the 5th. He was a great symphonist. He wrote at least, if we leave out 1, 2, and 4, which I think have gorgeous things in them, and they're wonderful pieces. But in terms of supreme masterpieceosity, you'd have to say 3, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so that's 6 of them. That's pretty good. That's a pretty damn good record. And the 7th it's glorious. It's as great a 19th century symphony as anyone in the 19th century ever wrote. It is so beautiful melodically. It has an intellectual and emotional depth that is second to none. None. And it deserves, I think, pride of place in this list of 7ths. And we have to give one to Dvorak. He was such a great composer. I mean, how can you not acknowledge that? But somehow, because he's so tuneful, because he's so easy to listen to, we tend to downgrade his significance, and we tend to denigrate his sophistication as a composer. He was supposed to be a fluffy Czech peasant type person who just churned out tunes, but he wasn't. He was a smart composer. I mean, he may not have been well read. Brahms always said, "Well, he doesn't read enough," and Dvorak said about Brahms, he doesn't believe in anything, So, and they were very good friends, but they were very different people. But what matters is not, your erudition or your college smarts. What most great composers, very few of them ever had higher education. One of the few who did was Mendelssohn. I mean, all the others were, trained as musicians, basically. And that's what Dvorak was. And what matters is that he was a genius as a composer. It doesn't matter if he wasn't a genius at anything else. He was a great composer, and I think his 7th Symphony is just one of the glories of the repertoire, and so I'm giving it pride of place in this particular list. Now, I'm sure you will have your own 7ths, but there may be fewer of them than in previous outings on this list, because we're starting to winnow the field. No question about that. But keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.